Hello, Southern guys and gals. This is Remember That I Have a YouTube channel guy 912 here with your usually inconsistent flow of videos and projects as usual. I'd like to go into detail about what has been keeping me from making videos as of late, but right now I don't want to bore you with it on top of making a video on a completely separate topic. So with that out of the way, a particular YouTuber has piqued my interest and critique what with mega media corporations doling out their usual guilt by association tactics and literally Hitler character assassinations. I'm sure what with the title and the timing of events, it shouldn't come as a surprise to you that it's E:R, or more colloquially known as ER, a edgy reviewer who has made long dissertations on some cartoon shows and popular Hollywood movies alike. PewdiePie, the bastard that he is, dared promote his videos, notably the one in regards to the live-action Death Note movie. Of course, seeing that calling someone alt-right is about as comparable to telling someone that they breathe oxygen, every article was quick to say how PewdiePie was in support of alt-right Nazism and the usual extremes, with no context to get in the way of the given narrative. I mean, seeing that PewdiePie can be a Nazi because he shook hands with someone who's so tenuously related to a Nazi, or merely reacting to a TikTok vid with Baked Alassa on it, is indicative of how the term itself literally means nothing. If everyone is a fucking white supremacist, no one will be. But that's not the point of contention I have with ER or edgy reviewer here. My criticism of ER belies solely on his Fury Road video, as well as his unusually flexible definition of Mary Sue to suit his argument. As a disclaimer, no, I don't hate ER. I've watched plenty of his videos and appreciate the lengths he goes to deconstruct them. Hell, I don't hate PewdiePie, and I think there are things to criticize of him too. He's not a Nazi, he's not a white supremacist, he's merely a guy who will keep nailing a joke to the point that it's hard to tell if it is a deliberate criticism of the movie or media, which is the main contention I have with him. Primarily that in Fury Road, he keeps beating the same drum about how it's a pro-feminist movie and is keen on trying to string together that idea like a conspiracy theorist drawing yarn between thumbtacks. You could even say he takes advantage of the old articles praising the movie for its feminist themes and decides that he'll go full kilter the opposite way, which just seems like either cheap pandering or lazy introspection on his part. But of course, I'm not going to claim all that without giving his fair shake, because he does list some issues with the movie that I can't deny, so I'm not also saying that his video is bereft of value. Roll the clip. Okay, so that we can actually move along with the arguments he's making, as clever and slightly humorous the juxtaposition is in this clip, it has little to do with the parts I want to respond to, so for posterity, I'm just going to skip bits like this unless he's using it to support a given argument.
In keeping with my proclivity to shit all over what other people love, I give you Furiosa and Mad Maxine, Feels Road.
Well, not even a minute in, and we got ourselves one nail on this bumpy road of his. He might be making a dry statement about he deliberately goes out of his way to hate things that everyone else loves, or he could be genuine, which makes me think that his arguments for why the movie is bad are in bad faith, as he's determined to hate on it just to be the iconoclast. I'm sure we'll find out whether that is his intention later on.
One of the silliest action movies of 2015, and not in a good way.
I don't want to just respond with, well, it's just your opinion, since we don't know yet how he quantifies the action movie being silly, so I'll let it slide for now.
Directed by George Miller and edited by Nepotism, Feels Road follows the adventures of Furiosa and her hood ornament as they race across the desert to their polygamous lesbian grandmother's residential sandpit for magic beans.
This is all clearly hyperbole on ER's part, so again, I don't really have much to say in contention other than the nepotism argument, unless he's meaning that George Miller treats the franchise like his own child, and that only he gets to treat it as such.
The film's got great action, great effects, and nothing else.
Weird that he mentions the movie having great action when he just said earlier that it was one of the silliest action movies in a bad way, not to split hairs and try to infer that he literally meant that the action itself was silly.
So buckle up, because you're in for 2 hours of... I
am awaited in Valhalla!
I mean, isn't that what people came flocking to this movie for? Spectacular practical action effects and vibrant colors? Is this a bad thing or a good thing? I'm confused because ER just said the action is good, but then lapses on about how it's too much. Again, I'm reading way into it, so let me give him his say.
Let me preface this review by saying that I haven't seen the other films in the franchise.
Which seems contradicted by the fact that he'll pull various clips from the previous movies to prove his point about Fury Road being bad. I think this will be an important indication as he will blame aspects of this movie primarily on it rather than being a result of how the other three movies have come about delivering a plot or direction.
I'm still going to give you my opinion on it as a standalone, but keep in mind that the film is not a standalone. A lot of people treat Feels Road like a standalone, and I half suspect that they're right in that it feels like one, but it isn't one.
Frankly, I thought all of the Mad Max movies were supposed to be treated like anthology films regarding the post-apocalypse, save for the original Mad Max and Road Warrior. I treated Beyond Thunderdome and Fury Road as different interpretations of how Mad Max would find the means to survive the wasteland in different and unique ways. Let's see how ER makes the argument for the other.
It's a Mad Max film, in spite of the fact that there's no Mel Gibson, because he's old now, and in case you ever forget, he made a comment that hurt people's feelings.
Well, that's an argument if I ever heard one. You know, the Ghost in the Shell movie, as shitty as that was a standalone film, but I guess because it has Ghosts in the Shell in it, it has continuity with the anime movies and the TV show standalone complex, somehow. Not off to a great start on the argumentation. As for Mel Gibson, I'm mostly indifferent on his exclusion from this movie because on one hand, he is the definitive Mad Max character, but conversely, Mel has been off a roller coaster of emotions beyond just his weird moments of anti-Semitism. I don't hate the guy, don't get me wrong, I'm just not sure if a graying, tired Mad Max would have gelled well with the intensity and speed of Fury Road. I mean, if he did make an inclusion, it would make ER's argument of, it's a Mad Max movie, more poignant.
But still, Feels Road used the Mad Max franchise name to sell tickets.
Notice the seething and vile way he enunciates sell tickets. Like as if that's inherently a bad thing to capitalize on a cult classic franchise. Yeah, I guess Road Warrior and Mad Max just had free screenings for all to enjoy too, right? But if that were the case, Beyond Thunderdome wouldn't have existed. Really gets the noggin jogging, huh?
To have a complete and well-rounded opinion,
oxymoron, an opinion is inherently not well-rounded.
I would have to see the other movies as well.
Awkwardness aside, ever since I saw Tron Legacy with my dad before seeing the original Tron, I've always made it my goal to watch movies in sequence of one another, so when I was curious about Mad Max Fury Road, I went out of my way to see the other three movies. The original one is genuinely shit, Road Warrior is decent but still empty in plot, and Beyond Thunderdome does have more plot but lacking in the car combat that made Mad Max a cult hit. I would personally say that Fury Road is my favorite of the four, balancing the action and plot and cutting out the languished fat that a lot of the action scenes of the older movies had in spades. Again, that's just my opinion, bro, but I'm willing to hear any criticism of the movie, as there is criticism to be had. I have to wonder, if ER had seen the other movies, he would have had a better understanding of where Fury Road is coming from, because as soon as he made it abundantly clear that he was deliberately trying to shit on the movie for no other reason but being a contrarian, I find his arguments against it arbitrary, while also making his claim that he never seen the older movies dishonest, as he'll pull examples from the older movies to weigh it against Fury Road.
And unfortunately, after watching this one, that ain't gonna happen.
Again, pretty strange for someone to not only pull examples of clips from older movies to explain why Fury Road is comparatively shit compared to it, but also use Fury Road as the reason he wouldn't see the other movies. He hasn't yet, but I'm telling you he will soon.
One more thing.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
The Mad Max setting is retarded. It's a big deserty wasteland where water, food, and the essentials are scarce, but functioning cars and motorbikes are somehow plentiful.
Exactly my point. If ER had seen the settings for Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome, he would equally slash those movies for having thinly veiled settings upon thinly veiled plots, but chooses to make Fury Road the standout amongst it. Also, ER, you do realize that water and food and the essentials are a finite resource, right? Cars and motorbikes don't decay in the heat and dryness. In fact, They are the best conditions for vehicles to run in. And just so I'm doing my part, gasoline can't evaporate inside of vehicles as long as it's tightly secured within its own gas cap. And even if it did, it would evaporate inside of the combustion chamber of a car, causing difficult startups at the worst. I don't get why this is an issue for vehicles to be functional and plentiful in this world, but water and food are scarce in a desert setting, for Christ's sake. Hell, Fallout 3 made a good excuse as to why there were barely any functional vehicles at all as a result of a residual EMP blast after a nuclear fallout. I don't remember Mad Max ever detailing something similar to that. In fact, wasn't the apocalypse a fight for fossil fuels like oil and gasoline? If he saw Road Warrior, he could very clearly infer that the oil war is still going on with the raiding bandit gangs trying to secure an oil depot so they can pillage indefinitely.
But it knows it's retarded and relishes in it. It's all rather kitsch, and it pulls that part off pretty spectacularly.
Weird juxtaposition between hating a movie for its ridiculousness, but also complimenting it for how lavish he wants to go for it. Maybe it's defeated indifference on ER's part, mainly?
So I won't be nitpicking any of that, at the very least.
Cue ER whinging about the choice of name of a character or a particular shoulder mountain scene too, no less.
Now, let's get right into it, shall we?
2 minutes and 46 seconds to start the video, and I thought my boring intros were long.
My name is Max.
Narration. Well, not a minute in and already we're off to a bad start. Need I remind anybody, film is a visual medium. You're supposed to show us visually what is going on, not tell us. To make matters worse, this narration doesn't tell us anything that the visuals don't already. If you're going to be lazy and narrate, explain how shit got so fucked. Just something, anything that the audience can't already infer for themselves. But all in all, it's a minor offense.
Don't have any qualms at this point. I really don't care much for expository bullshit right at the start of a movie, as it's usually a bad sign of bad writing, like the aforementioned Gets Live Action's 2-paragraph exposition. However, ER notes this is specifically a fault of this movie, and not of a consequence of the previous Mad Max films, as they also had flimsy narration about the coming apocalypse and how Max intends to survive its aftermath. Argument of tradition would be the cudgel on this film's poor head.
Max is immediately chased down by these dudes in cars, chained up and taken captive. Wait, I thought Max's car was supposed to be a big part of these movies, that it was a fixture of the franchise, much like lightsabers have become for Star Wars. But that fixture is destroyed right at the start. That struck me as odd. Well, it's not too bad a start. Let's keep going.
I will concede that it was strange how easily Max gets apprehended, and you can even see that the stuntman behind the car was instinctually turning so as to make the car topple over once the pistons below propelled it overhead. However, again, ER is treating this as a problem unique to this movie when in Thunderdome, the car was literally a plot device used to motivate Max to go into Bartertown to compete for its retrieval after it was stolen from him. I almost just want to put a tally of refuted if you've seen Mad Max 1, 2, or 3 anytime ER brings up a problem with Fury Road and treats it like it's single-handedly Fury Road's burden to bear.
Max, is that you? How are you, Max?
Damn. This is kind of awesome. Man, I'm getting into this. I like Max. He's proactive, resourceful, and as the narration before so superfluously stated,
Haunted by those I could not protect.
Wow, something ER praises about Fury Road that I don't care much about. I honestly thought it was weird how Max was seeing visions of those he failed as a sort of plot device to give him a moral conscience when he already had that, what with him failing to save his wife and kid from bandits in the original Mad Max. Spoilers. Razor Fist, another critic of Fury Road, had much stronger words about these visions as he complained about how their inclusion is unbeknownst to the viewer unless they read the graphic novel that acts as a sort of prequel and foundation for the events leading up. As for me, I'm on the fence for both, as I don't think we really need to know the visions that haunt Max, merely understand that they are directing him in some way to do good things despite the bad he did. But I also would say that as one who has watched the previous Mad Max movies, we already had Max's moral coda pretty wedged in, and that this felt needlessly tacked on for those unfamiliar with Mad Max previously. Anyhow, Carry on.
I sure hope that we get some more insight into this tortured character, see what really makes him tick, and the sequence of events that led up to his capture.
Psych! That's the wrong
cinematic motion picture.
Again, I'm mostly indifferent about the weird visions that haunt him, as it's tacked on and unnecessary for someone who is already tortured by his past.
Sorry, but beyond this point, Max ceases to be a character and becomes little more than a prop to tell the story of the actual main character of this film, Furiosa.
Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. First off, this fucking clip that ER showed, in spite of him not really delving into it, had a bunch of comments from people complaining about how Max was being used as a mount for Furiosa's gun, and that his poor little eardrums were going to get hurt, and how it was all nonsensical and whatnot, basically white knighting for a scene about teamwork and trying to twist it as some kind of affirmation as to how the women were better, when not a fucking peep from these same people was made in regards to when Max fired 3 Glock rounds around Furiosa's head, hurting her poor little eardrums. Nice to be inconsistent when you're just looking for an enemy to fight, right? Secondly, Mad Max, and I know this is going to be a contentious point, is not an interesting character. I've said it plenty of times by myself, but I'll say it here. He's post-apocalypse Batman. Everything else around him is cool and interesting, but he himself is not. More importantly, Max has been a vehicle, or prop as ER would put it, since the second fucking movie. What was Max's motivation in life in Road Warrior? Oh yeah, that's right, fucking gasoline. In the third movie, Max's entire motivation was equally as selfish, as all he wanted was his car and damn the rest. It comes as no surprise that plots were written in to make these stories more involved beyond that, what for the drama and the gas tipo of Road Warrior, or the inside power politics between Tina Turner's character and Master Blaster, for instance, as Mad Max was used as a pawn in Tina's game to thwart Master Blaster so she could control Bartertown for herself. If ER had seen those movies, he'd understand that, but no, we're just going to feign ignorance of that and use Fury Road as an example of ultra-hard left-leaning pandering to feminism or some other nonsense. I guess Beyond Thunderdome is feminist too by that metric, as a man was being toyed by a woman for her own scheme. Shit, at least Furiosa was pure in her intentions.
Now, I have to applaud Feels Road for leading the progressive stack with the very first trans woman protagonist. Wait, the wiki doesn't mention anything about that. No, but if she were an actual woman, this would make her the utterly cartoonish depiction of a she-man, the old man with breasts cliche. That can't be right.
And indeed, you aren't right, unless ER is trying to say that Furiosa is the Ms. Male character to Mad Max. He doesn't have anything to go by but merely squinting as hard as he possibly can to find the clues hidden. While also dabbling in both hyperbole and sarcasm, he also implies that Furiosa is merely good because she's a woman, or that her character is entirely composed of a woman, trying to draw parallels with Mare Sue, as he coined it, where it need not apply. I'm not certain how the hell he's inferring that from the movie, so I can only assume he's making this conclusion based on the hype it got from a lot of third-wave feminists, which is especially irksome given just how easy of a bait he's latching on just to hammer home.
Maybe these are just her preferred pronouns? Either way, I guess I'll use she for the rest of this review.
Again, with how dryly he states everything, I can't tell if he's genuinely confused by the gender of the character or just trying to invoke satire to get the coattails of third-wave feminists.
So Caitlyn Jenner is a warrior for this place, the Citadel, and is prepping to leave with a bunch of water in this war rig to trade for gasoline at Gastown. She's doing this at the behest of the Citadel's leader, Immortan Joe. Is that really his name?
Wait, I thought we weren't going to nitpick Emergency Room.
Joey here is something like a god in these here parts, and accordingly, he tries to keep up that appearance. Except he is one fat, diseased, ugly motherfucker. And American?
Again, he might just be making a joke that George Miller is inherently anti-American, which wouldn't make a lick of sense given the production of this movie and how George wanted Road Warrior shipped to American shores where the original was not. Or he really does think George is making a statement against America, and not just a way to show, as ER states it, Immortan Joe's godlike stag. Is it me, or is ER just a bit autistic? And this is coming from someone who has Asperger's, no less. Funny how he's quick to jump on joking about autism so quickly while he's fervently scraping on this movie for any fault he can, like counting grains of sand on a beach. It just seems like massive projection on his part.
Basically, Joey controls the water. Water is incredibly precious in this world, so when these poor saps get to see it, they act like crack addicts, trying to lap up as much of it as possible. But because Joey doesn't leave the spigot on, he is an evil, evil man. Don't believe me? Just look at how fat he is. Look at how fat and deformed his family is. Sure, this guy is a beefcake, but he's clearly portrayed as slow in the head and probably a bit sickly, unless he has these tubes in his nostrils for recreational purposes.
There are a multitude of issues involving this scene that ER will delve into later, as it provokes a lot of intrigue as to whether Moron Joe only turning the water on at intervals is integral to keeping as much water as possible, making Moron Joe's morality somewhat justified, while also coming into question the morality of the new leaders of the Citadel after Furiosa takes over, fighting to leave the spigots on indefinitely. There's an argument as to how much water is left, the efficiency of the water being drained, but for me, if the intent of this movie was to paint Moron Joe as selfish and evil, how I would do this scene was have the water flow through a sort of trough where Moron Joe's men would have the peasantry line up to only get a certain amount, and then pan to the source of the water where there is a near limited supply of it to indicate that Moron Joe is keeping it all to himself, and then have the peasants fight over the water where he can dictate, "Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. You will resent its absence." It would not only show where Moron Joe's morality lie, but it would also solve the issue of the water becoming contaminated as well as running out once Furiosa and the Milkers take over the Citadel. But hey, I guess now I'm being autistic as to how this scene should have played out. But I will agree, it was a poorly executed scene that didn't do enough to give us a reason to hate Moron Joe for the right reasons.
And look at Joey's military force of cultic followers, who are absolutely nothing at all like Muslims, we swear it.
I'll admit that the War Boys share connotations with that extremist religion, but the War Boys also dabble in some other religions like Buddhism. I live, I die, I live again! And Viking worship. And Moron Joe will take me to the gates of Valhalla, all shiny and chrome. Which to me is a great way of visually introducing how the post-apocalypse would birth a hodgepodge of different religious subtexts tacked on to keep the men in line. But hey, don't let that stop the feminists from thinking that Moron Joe is primarily out to hurt women.
Look at how he keeps a room full of cow women to make milk for him. Is that not just the most evil thing you ever did see? Or perhaps it's just pandering to the lowest common denominator in the audience.
Was all of this just the lead up to how ER feels that Moron Joe is unjustly portrayed as the bad guy? Don't get me wrong, Moron Joe does have a good thing going, a sensible trade route cycle where he maintains some sort of civility, but Moron Joe is still inherently a dictator, as he's willing to do it at the great expense of the peasants as well as the alien war boys. You make it seem like it's a fruitful endeavor for the war boys to have this strange religion to hoist, but you must understand that Moron Joe made this religion out because he was instantly aware that the war boys are on borrowed time. You see it with Nox's desperation to fight alongside Moron Joe to prove himself as the other war boys doubt his ability to even stand up, given his half-life as they call it. Seeing that you also mentioned Moron Joe's ailment, you also seem to comb over that Moron Joe is looking for a way to outdo this half-life that affects him and the rest of the populace, as illustrated by the breeders later on. Again, while this might seem good on the surface, what makes a bad guy is that the means always justifies the ends to do it. It doesn't matter to Mordon if he's sending the dying war boys to their deaths willingly. It doesn't matter to Mordon if he has to disregard the personal freedom of the breeders. If it gets him a generation of pure and clean children, he's willing to do it. And fantastically, all of that is portrayed without the exposition you criticized earlier at the beginning.
See, Joey is fat.
Bloated, sure, but fat? Not really. I don't get how fat was analogous to evil either. And as for Telescope Guy, he's literally a deformed midget bound by his chair. Do you expect him to be skinny? Seems pretty weird to infer villainy based on the quality of fat rolls. Not that I would consider this fat shaming or anything.
In this world of limited resources, being fat is an even greater condemnation of self-indulgence than it is in Burgerland or Cuck Island. It doesn't make sense given everything else we know about him in the setting, but it's hard to see past the skin flaps.
Which is why it feels extremely weird to imply that Moron Joe being fat is how we discern whether he's evil. You don't even know if his bloatedness is a result of his condition or if he needlessly self-indulges. In fact, the leader of Gastown is arguably fat and self-indulgent, from his extremely analytical means to calculate losses and gains, and of the way he has a group of servants hoist him up to his luxurious truck. I even watched the bonus commentary in the movie where the leader of Gastown was meant to be portrayed as such. How you confuse him with a Mordon is beyond me.
Additionally, Joby is old, diseased, and covered in these nasty sores and the like. On a base level, this is simply discomforting to look at, and is a lazy way to emotionally manipulate your audience.
I didn't see it as that, but I guess that's merely my interpretation of the event. I more took that and Moron Joe's actions as to precisely why he holds so much value for the breeders beyond anything else, even in regards to the fucking plot, that he himself is so disfigured that he sees a future where that doesn't have to be the case, but again, he's willing to do it as ruthlessly as he can to achieve it, which does not make him a redeemable figure in a certain light.
Throw in a few disfigurements, some deformation, and a midget, and you've successfully catered to everybody's Darwinian instinct to despise the weak and unhealthy.
Pretty weird way to interpret that scene, as we are made to not be sympathetic for their actions, as we clearly sympathize with the milkers as you consider them deformed as a consequence of continuously swallowing their breasts to a disproportionate size. But I guess if you need some brownie points to point out the hypocrisy of leftist media, then by all means continue on with your molehill.
Okay, so he's fat and gross, but if that's not enough evil for you, he also locks up beautiful women in the vault to use as breeders. Bam! The final nail in the coffin. Mistreating women, children, or puppies is a flat-out no-no.
But indoctrinating your disfigured yet physically capable masses with a nonsense religion is okay, right? No way we could find something morally wrong with that. Jeez. The nerve of some people to knee-jerk about feminism always being selfishly fixated on women's superiority, while also knee-jerk about us wanting to sympathize with slaves. Oh, how dare we do that?
Never mind that these girls obviously get some of the best food, drink, and housing as compensation. Never mind that they are some of the most privileged, well-cared-for people in the Citadel, or for that matter, anywhere else presented in the movie. Never mind that most everybody else has it so bad that they worship water. A fat, ugly, diseased man is porking models against their will, and that's the very definition of evil. Meanwhile, I'm amused at how fucking goofy sex slavery is portrayed to be here.
This is ER's opportunity to wax on how, if he were in their position, he would totally take the D, completely missing the point that the breeders want freedom in spite of the comfort slavery may bring. I mean, I guess those house sneakers in the plantation had so good that they never want to be freed, right? I guess ER would allot himself with Steven from Django Unchained in that instance, right? And I get that ER isn't advocating for sex slavery on a whole, just in the greater context of the apocalypse, yet completely ignores the doubt and naivete of the breeders once they do attempt their escape route. Plenty of them are scared. Hell, some of them even negotiate to themselves how Morton would take them back, and that they can forget all the bad that comes with being chattel. How exactly he ignores this detail about them is strange, as if he thinks they are completely assured in their decision right out of the get, when they nearly get derailed in their escape plan by Mad Max himself. ER is also making a bad argument of whataboutism, where he's questioning the decisions of the characters based on his own experiences rather than how their decision makes sense. This isn't a situation like in The Last Jedi, where Holdo had no reason not to tell Poe Dameron the plan and only did so as a plot device to have two subplots home in. How is the breeder's decision to leave based solely on the philosophy that freedom comes at a great cost? A nation who values safety over freedom doesn't deserve freedom or safety, as Ben Franklin once coined.
Do you honestly think that the breeders would be this old? If Fields Road had even a touch of realism.
Gonna stop you there. You just remarked at how ridiculous and ridiculously awesome the ridiculousness of Fury Road is. Don't start trying to supplant realism when convenient to your argument.
Women would be throwing themselves in swarms at Joey and his crew for the benefits of being a breeder.
Maybe, but you do understand that the breeders themselves are clean and pure and not coated with the same problems and ailments of other women, right? I mean, isn't that why Furiosa isn't a breeder because of her disfigurement, albeit a small one? Again, whataboutism? What if all the women did just decide to open their vulva to Moron Joe's distended cock, right? Wow, what a bad movie this is. Like, if I constantly try to put my own values into movies, no movie would ever be good. But that's not the fucking point of a movie, Elliot Roger. Whoops! Looks like I'm gonna lose this channel like Mumkey Jones did. I said he who shall not be named.
Sure, you can hate the guy for choosing the cream of the crop for himself.
Implied, since we actually don't know if Immorton himself impregnates them or Mr. Beefcake does, it's not entirely clear as to whom does the breeding.
But you can't say that he doesn't richly reward them for it.
Well, hey, if that's how we look at morality, I guess Hitler was an upstanding citizen because he made the Autobahn and gave us some swanky-ass clothes too. Ends justifies the means with edgy reviewer here. I mean, Hitler richly rewarded Jews with death, right?
I mean, look at all these books. They must be rare as fuck. And yet my man Joey gave his harem a stocked library.
Not sure if books fall within the purview of essentials, as paper and written word aren't nearly as hard to decay as water and food, but potato, potato. It might just stand to the testament of how the ladies were treated as breeders, that they would forsake all of that just for an inch of freedom, and clearly, they still had reservations to leave.
Hot damn, if I had a uterus, I'd be living it up in that bedazzled crib with my legs wide open 24/7, rather than mucking about in the dirt, wondering if I'll ever taste water again.
If I was the Terminator in Terminator 2, I would have thrown the frozen pieces of the T-1000 into the molten lava just so to save all that drama. If I was Han Solo in A New Hope, I would have helped Luke destroy the Death Star rather than just leave him and the rebels to do all the work until the last moment. If I was a couple in Paranormal Activity, I would have moved out of that house as soon as shit started to get awry. You see how fucking reductive and pedantic these kinds of sentiments are? That you have to literally forsake any motivation that the characters may have to doing something and try to insert your own motivations as a criticism of the movie? It has nothing to do with it not making sense. It has everything to do with it not being your decision to do it in the first place.
In summation, Immortan Joe is a man capable of creating all of this: a functional society, of drilling for and storing drinkable water, of building a military force of loyal war boys, all in this arid, cloudless, bumblefuck wasteland. But he's actually a useless ham monster who's tricking everybody into it.
Yes. How is that not obvious? The War Boys' fading half-life being used as mere cannon fodder for assaults on the Citadel? The Breeders being used as a facilitation to continue in Moron Joe's regime? Again, it doesn't matter if what Joe's got going is good. He's going about it in evil ways, to the detriment of everybody. How is that hard to understand, emancipated rapist?
Not asking for a lot, Fields Road, just some semblance of cause and effect.
Except where you try to implant your own anecdotal experience of how you would go about doing something hypothetically as a way to criticize a movie for doing something you wouldn't do. Again, I guess all the characters are merely just NPCs for us to inject our own biases and beliefs onto, and don't have already written in beliefs that fuel their actions later on. This isn't a video game, ER.
Anyway, back to the main character. Furiosa heads out of the Citadel with a bunch of escorts, but surprise! She's actually smuggling out Joey's harem. And it's at this discovery that any of the internal logic of this film completely collapses. Let's review. Why are they trying to escape? Well, duh, because the girls felt like property. Now, they were the most well-treated, coddled property ever, and obviously had it better than almost everybody else, but these people are ugly, and filthy, and old. Why feel bad for them when you can feel bad for well-off, beautiful women with principles?
Or we can feel bad for both? Why is this an either-or scenario? Or that I can't feel bad for the filthy and old people in a different way to the harem of breeders?
How did they get out?
That is actually a pretty good question. I can't reason to use the open interpretation argument, as there was no scene set up to imply their escape or how they got smuggled into Furiosa's war rig, nor how Furiosa had top-level access to the vault to even communicate with the breeders even.
Fields Road never says. We know these women were trapped in a vault, but for whatever inexplicable reason, Furiosa had the access to plan this escape with them. From this, we must assume that Furiosa is telepathic, as are all the girls, because women are the Borg.
Nothing to say here. He's right on the money. Doesn't really make a lick of sense and does sort of ruin the show-don't-tell nature of the movie that they just inexplicably teleported under the rig to have this conflict known.
Where are they headed?
That is something we don't need to know yet and will be told to us later on in the movie. Why it's important at the moment we see them under the rig is weird.
Somewhere called the Green Place. It's supposed to be some fertile paradise. Sounds too good to be true, right? Almost like it's made up. Like it would be impossibly frighteningly stupid to run from a bomb-ass library to a fairy tale.
That wasn't the sole intent behind the breeders leaving ER. Pretty dishonest of you. It wasn't merely the place they were going, but what the place would imply once they got there. Hope, freedom, something where they could be themselves and do as they want. I get that a place like that in the apocalypse does seem far-fetched, but Furiosa is confident that exists because she was there, and the breeders are naive and desperate enough to attempt to escape if it means any semblance of freedom. Although, I guess I'm using the argument of insanity clause in this instance, but at the same time, it feels utterly simplistic just to say that the breeders are merely chasing a dream.
We're supposed to root for these chicks?
You don't have to do it just because he tells you. What choice does she have? He's not going to have.
Apparently so. Why?
Again, because we can understand that they are giving up a great comfort in favor of having independence. Whether or not that would be your decision in that instance is not the source of why we sympathize in some small way to their cause.
Why did they decide to escape when surrounded by a bunch of enemy escorts instead of any other time at all?
I'm not entirely sure of the role that Furiosa plays in, but I'm going to assume that what with the war rig being extremely durable, it having a plentiful supply of water and milk, as it was en route to send out food to Gastown, and that Furiosa made sure to drive into enemy territory to weed out the escort so that she could drive out alone in the war rig before the war boys could send something to Monk. Again, I'm certain that it could be easier if Furiosa just took a small jalopy in the middle of the night with the breeders, and it might be easier, but then I would say that it's yet another instance of whataboutism.
The film does explain later that they needed the water to trade with these folks for passage through this canyon. Makes more sense than anything else so far. What was their plan to deal with the escorts?
So what's the plan? Plan? Right, no plan!
Exactly what I mean when in regards to blatant contradictions on ER's part. He's never seen the previous movies, but purposely uses a clip to discredit Fury Road. Also, again, I reiterate, she deliberately went into enemy territory so that she could lead the escort into a death trap with the Scarabs or whatever the hell their name is. Even the guy riding on her side exclaims that they're entering into enemy territory. Was that a detail so hard to miss?
When Joey hears of the escape, he throws a shit fit and sends everybody after them because two of these girls did technically just kidnap his prospective children. Thing is, when I say everybody, I mean basically everybody able-bodied enough to go, leaving the Citadel undefended.
Yeah, that's another bit about the movie that didn't make much sense of to me, especially when Moron Joe remarks that like he's read the script or something. Even if Moron Joe was that fucking determined to get his breeders back, I don't think even he would risk the Citadel being literally sacked for it. That's on a level of absurdity even I can't excuse for just being that passionate for. I do find it rich that ER is trying to give Moron Joe some moral leverage by implying that the babies conceived of by rape have been taken by him, but, you know, are we sure that ER is against sex slavery?
It did happen, by the way. I'm not making it up. It's a major plot point later on.
And now it's undefended!
Call me crazy, but I have a feeling that for Fields Road, they mostly filmed the car chase sequences first, and then wrote a script around it.
Same could be said for the other three, but notice that he said for Fields Road again, as if Fury Road holds this unique distinction. I'm not trying to say that as an excuse for it to be in the movie, but to blame that solely on Fury Road just seems unfair for someone who hadn't seen the previous three movies. It'd be like if I hadn't seen the prequel trilogy for Star Wars and then blame the OT for solely having corny dialogue. It's intellectually dishonest, and I think ER knows it, because if he didn't, he wouldn't have been able to infer it using clips from the previous movies.
Can't support this claim. Just call it a hunch.
Oh, so an argument out of faith then, especially bad faith considering that's how Road Warrior and Mad Max 1 felt designed by. But ER is being so cheeky about it too, like he's decoded Fury Road so well even though he completely disregards the previous movies as a result of this one, but will use the previous movies to shit on this one. What a strange man you are, Mr. Enema Rhapsody.
Anyway, where's Max during all of this? Oh, it's funny because in the first few minutes of the film, they destroy his car, but get this, they replace it with Max himself. Max is now the vehicle with which to tell the story.
Wow, you've pinned the tail right on this donkey, except for the big secret. Let me tell you, Max has always been a vehicle for the movie ever since Road Warrior. This is not a consequence of Fury Road, merely a symptom of how Mad Max is so utterly vain and empty a character that you have to have the rest of the world teeming with character in order to make the watch justified.
But he's no longer the one driving the story. He is now literally just along for the ride.
Tell me, ER, would you fathom Max wanting gas as a significant plot point that drove the story in Road Warrior? Would Max wanting his car back after it being stolen from him count as him driving the story of Beyond Thunderdome? Oh wait, that's right! You didn't see them! Slam and dunk. How many times is that on the board of refuted by Mad Max 1, 2, or 3 now?
Why is he on the front of the car like this?
Again, I'll concede it's a silly way to put a precious blood bag, as Knox puts it, not only directly in harm's way, but also in the way of the driver's sight. I don't want to merely scoff this as the movie just being goofy, as it contravenes against Knox's abilities to drive and of his own survival.
Well, he's some sickly Warboy's blood bag, and for whatever reason, Warboy thought it was prudent to put his blood bag on the front of his car, in the most exposed, perilous position possible. I guess it doesn't matter to Warboy if Max is punctured and drained of all of his blood, because even later when Max escapes, Warboy gets along just fine without.
Again, aptly put. However, I do think Knox had just enough of Max's blood in him to continue intervening for the remainder of the movie. But again, that's also pushing the believability, seeing as Knox just moments earlier seemed about ready to collapse from blood loss or disease.
So why did he need Max as a blood bag at all? Hey, look! Cool action sequences! Ooh! Ah!
I mean, Knox and his pal already stated that he needed to keep Knox going, and while there was reluctance from the group, Knox desperately wanted to prove himself to Immortan, which is motivation for why Knox eventually departs from Immortan's group. While this is just a means to make fun of how the movie attempts to distract you from the glaring problems, that was a pretty well explained reason. Of course, it doesn't explain why Knox is able to function without Max's blood well after the fact.
And to be fair, they really are pretty cool. I mean, look at this shitstorm. It's awesome.
Weird aside, the first use the sequences as a distraction from the issues of the movie, and then praise it simultaneously, as he will do later on.
I personally think this flame guitar bit is kinda stupid, but hey, everything else looks like a rock album cover, so fuck it.
Remarking his previous line about how the movie lavishes in its ridiculousness and how that's a plus, but also a minus somehow. I mean, the Flame guy is clearly meant to invoke morale to the group, kind of like old wartime drummer boys, but with a post-apocalyptic spin on it. I mean, would ER say that was ridiculous despite it serving a purpose? I mean, if Immortan Joe were just to tell the boys that they were flinging themselves at a truck for the sole purpose of his breeders, I don't think that would be enough to convince them to go.
The shitstorm hits and Joey and friends get separated from the girls. Warboy here, though, just gets wrecked. Max magically survives this and works to escape and rouses a spark of interest in me once again. Problem is that he's chained to Warboy in this car door, which is pretty analogous to how this movie has treated him thus far.
I'm almost certain that the fact that the chain was the only thing that kept Max and Knox together makes me think why Knox wasn't as concerned about Mad Max possibly dying as a result of him being tied up to the front. Moreover, now that I'm thinking about it, war boys are inherently suicidal, no? I mean, they want their death to be legendary, just like how that one turret guy got shot in the face with an arrow but managed just a second win to sacrifice himself to destroy the oncoming scarab behind them. Perhaps it didn't matter to Knox that Max being tied to the front of his car didn't really make sense. It only was important to Knox that if he was going to die, he wouldn't die sitting in the Citadel to rot, but on the desert plain for Immortan Joe to witness. He makes a show about he and his power at the front of the pack, just so Knox can prove his worth to him. This is all pretty well executed in the establishing shots. No exposition, no less. Yet, we're just made to believe that Max being tied to the front is completely nonsensical for the sake of it?
But lo and behold, they've wrecked right next to the war rig. Lucky.
Yeah, I'll definitely call that an utter plot contrivance, seeing that the war rig should have been at least miles ahead rather than merely parking 10 feet behind Knox's crashed car where the ensuing sandstorm was just a few scenes earlier.
Max saunters over to the girls as they act out a sexy car wash music video.
I mean, I guess you could get a rise out of the scene, although I think the intent of it was to display how clean and pure they were, contrasting with how noticeably uncomfortable Max is having to hold a car door, a shotgun, and an unconscious man while chained to them by blood. I also don't think the scene itself was just there for pure titillation, as they were moisturizing themselves from being under the dry, heated war rig for some time.
Only they aren't washing the car. Rather than dislodge the sand from the war rig, they're washing themselves. Because priorities.
ER, you do know how basic automobiles function, no? That's a carburetor or some kind of ventilation shaft. Giving that thing water is only going to make that dust stick and just shorten out the truck. And I'm no mechanic, mind you. Hitting it with a wrench was the only best way to deal with it. And more importantly, in a desert wasteland, are you really going to bother attempting to clean a truck?
What a fucking waste. No wonder Joey kept the aquifer under his control. These girls would extinguish the water supply in a week's worth of showers.
I mean, they are only wasting the water that was intended to be used at Gastown in the war rig, so is it really that much of a waste? Also, I guess being surprised by someone coming towards them in a vulnerable position trumps being coldly logical in the face of it.
By the way, the girls are wearing chastity belts for some reason. Not sure why girls put away in a vault for the sole purpose of breeding would be wearing chastity belts of all things.
If Furiosa, of no undefined authority of Amorjo's men, could sneak into the vault, then I'm sure that any sleazeball who just wanted to stuff his disfigured cock in the breeders could too. Not that this could also be explained by a simple insurance policy on Immorton's part to ensure that the gene pool is kept clean from any tumors or diseases.
But hey, maybe on top of keeping them in the vault, Joey was being super duper cautious and didn't want the girls jumping any albino bones.
Clear foreshadowing to when the redhead starts having feelings for Nox later on, which I admit is a pretty tacked on romance chick that doesn't have any chemistry whatsoever, but yes, maybe indeed, Joe wanted to make sure that his purebred breeders were only popping out pure children, not like that was the entire point of Joe even to go so far to get them back, no.
Anyway, Max does the actual smart thing to
survive
and attempts to steal the war rig for himself. The girls aren't quite receptive to this strategy.
Wait, was that Max's plan when he was doing that? Because I'm pretty sure all he wanted was the water and someone to monkey wrench the chain free, and stealing the war rig only came as a thought after Furiosa attacked him? Seems a bit disingenuous on your part to deliberately mislead your audience into the events happening?
Now this is easily my favorite scene in Fields Road, because it's all of these women ganging up on Max while he's dragging along a comatose body and a car door, and he still manages to fuck them over.
Well, the breeders aren't really ready-bound fighters. Furiosa only has one hand, she attached her cybernetic one on the truck, and Nox eventually awakes from consciousness to help Max fight. All those little details exclaim, in joviality no less, how Max single-handedly beat the woman handicapped. Kind of a weird thing to be excited about, huh? And yet even more deliberate misinterpretation of the scene itself to portray it differently.
Done did it. Made a clean escape, left behind exactly what his pursuers wanted, and has a ton of water to last him however long. A damn good job of surviving, Max. You know, it would be hilarious if the movie just dumped these pointless empty characters, and Max got to be the star of his own movie again. Ah, fuck. Well, it could be worse.
I mean, it wouldn't really be in character for Max to do this if he had managed to get away, but seeing as the previous visions implied that he had failed other people beforehand, I guess this instance of Mad Max would make a bit more sense. Moreover, I do find the truck inexplicably failing because of some kind of fail-safe that Furiosa designed to be a pretty retarded excuse just to have Max reluctantly bring them on aboard, rather than the guilty conscious visions sway him into stopping for them and letting them along despite his better nature to leave them in the dust. Also, as much as Mad Max is stamped in bold on these movies, he very rarely ever feels like the star of his own show, merely a spectator of it. But if it supports your bias that Fury Road primarily wanted to shit on the character of Mad Max because of some agenda, then I guess you are now no different from a social justice warrior crying out malice and intent when incompetence is more likely the culprit.
At least now Mad Max can live up to his name. because this is far and away not the rational thing to do. How the fuck is taking these chicks, all of whom are gnashing their teeth and waiting for the opportunity to murder him, as well as being further pursued by Joey and his thugs, conducive to survival?
Well, for one, Furiosa is the only one who knows how to run the truck, so Max reluctantly has to play passenger hostage to them. Secondly, Max, before getting into the truck, shot wildly and injured one of the breeders, so if Max does get caught by a Mordon, he'll be implicated in her injuries and, by assumption, punished greatly for it. Thirdly, even if Max could try to strike a deal with Mordon's crew, he's already shown his alignment by beating down Nox after he got his jacket back and expunged the chain from him, so this is, as a consequence of plot, Max's only shot he has to survival. Maybe plot contrivance for him to graze the leg of a breeder so he can't just merely use their capture as a get-out-of-torture-free card, perhaps, but the rest I don't see how it wouldn't be rational.
Maybe the beginning narration lied to us?
A man reduced to a single instinct.
Die!
Maybe the movie's title lied to us?
Oh, come on, ER. I get that's a joke, but a joke is only funny if it has some truth to it. And Max being a white knight to the breeders in Furiosa makes literally no sense unless he decided immediately of his own volition to bring them along. Again, Max did attempt to leave him in the dust with his raw rig, which also contravenes his usual desire to have his car back, so that was initially conducive to his survival.
This movie has lost me. The girls are on the run because of semantics. Max is helping them because...
Is ER being deliberately obtuse, or does he not notice things in movies like I do? Anecdotal evidence, I know, but my old elementary grade teachers would remark about how much of a encyclopedic knowledge I had about the movies I had seen, probably in part by the fact that I'm a very visual guy when it comes to things. Did the breeder's leg getting grazed by Max not strike you as perhaps a reason as to why Max had to bring him along too? Was Furiosa saying her truck having a failsafe only she knows about a reason why she had to drive the truck with Max handgun in tow?
I don't know why the ratings for this movie are so damn high.
I don't want to try to make a case that Fury Road is just simply amazing and that he doesn't understand it, or that the movie only got such high ratings because of those who thought it was a pro-feminist movie, so I'm just going to say that his whinging about the ratings is just that, whinging.
None of this makes sense.
If you completely ignore every key detail that I just gave you to explain perhaps why something was like this, I guess observation only comes in phases for you. You're so acutely aware about the rampant feminist messages in the movie, yet so completely blind to small and key details shown throughout. It's almost like you are indeed wearing blinders.
Well, the rest of this movie is just chase scene after chase scene after chase scene, interspersed with snippets of the girls complaining.
He's a crazy smeg who eats schlanger.
I'm sorry, what?
He's a crazy smeg who eats schlanger.
Come again?
Crazy smeg who eats schlanger.
I'm sorry, but does that word mean something to you?
Does guzzling mean something, or is it a euphemism, perhaps? To be honest, I don't know the euphemism of that line. Maybe she's saying he's a crazy fuck who eats shit. Not like Mad Max minds her complaint anyway. He's completely passive about it all because he knows the gun's talking more than they.
Don't damage the goods.
Okay, whatever happened to the days when one could point a gun at somebody and they'd shut the fuck up? What's with all this snarky back talk?
I mean, I don't think Max intended to shoot the girl in the first place, merely get Furiosa's attention about something. I'm not exactly sure what in the context of just this snippet alone. It could also be a callback to when Max grazed that one breeder's foot too, who knows.
The girls are soon won over by Mad Max's charmingly well-timed grunts. And they even make friends with Warboy here, who now wants to bang this one. She seems DTF.
Does anyone notice that ER was too autistically coming over merely the first 10 minutes of the movie, but is now haplessly skipping over the larger portion of the movie? Either he's too damned to continue being so persistently knee-jerk about every little problem he has, or is so defeated in frustration that he can't give the rest of the movie that same justice? Seems like a lazy way to go about critiquing a movie, if you ask me.
Later down the proverbial road, there's a particularly horrible scene where the movie tries to pretend it's nighttime, but it's so obviously daytime with a filter thrown over it that it's just painful to watch.
Hey, anyone notice that bright light?
Oh, you mean the sun? The movie does this twice.
I can concede that it's a bad filter, but Realistically, if they were to film the movie in nighttime in the desert, it would quite literally be impossible as it's completely pitch black. Would ER prefer if the movie was mostly shot in pitch black, darkness just for the sake of realism? Isn't the point of the movie is to be garish in its gaudiness?
Miller, maybe you're getting a bit too old for this.
ER, have you ever seen Pitch Black? You know the part where the group is literally hand-chucking along some lights in the dark? That's what the movie would have looked like if they filmed it in the desert actually at night. Honestly, the filter is more or less consistent with the overtly vibrant nature of the movie in spite of its otherwise gruesome aesthetic.
Also, there's this ridiculous scene where the war rig gets stuck in some mud and they use this rickety-ass tree as leverage to pull it out.
Again, I can agree that it's an obvious plot device to add conflict for the group, as not in any other time as they are driving do they ever fall into a mudslide like unlike Immortan Joe's crew that get slowed down as a result of a trap that Max and crew made.
Or this scene, where Max is shooting at bad guys but can't seem to land a hit, so Furiosa to the rescue. Maybe this is supposed to be empowering or something, but the metaphor of Furiosa leaning on Max's firm, masculine shoulders to steady her shot? I don't know.
Oh, this fucking scene again, huh? Nope. Couldn't be a metaphor for how Furiosa and Mad Max need to work together when they've only reluctantly been on the same ride up to this point. It must be some kind of feminist conspiracy, I say! Never mind that Max already shot at least 3 fucking times out of the 4 available rounds they had, so perhaps give Furiosa a shot while also having Max help too could perhaps seal the deal, or in times that Furiosa needs Max's help plenty of times, and other scenes too. This must be some kind of entrenched stigma against the movie, hating its core audience and Mad Max himself? Jeez, what a fucking lunatic you are.
The funniest scene in this movie by far is during yet another chase scene, where one of the pregnant girls is hanging out of the war rig chassis because she...
I will say that it didn't make sense for her to be hanging out of the car for that long, well after they cut free the hook chain. But it's kind of weird for ER to mention a chase scene that happened before the night scene, where up to this point he's been chronological with the events apart from the usual foreshadowing he has been doing.
She dodges getting her stupid ass hit by a rock, but still manages to fuck it all up anyway. Evil Immortan Joe has to swerve and capsize his truck, endangering his own life in an attempt to avoid her. Remember kids, objectification saves lives.
Probably to pit a somewhat moral gray area for Immortan Joe's part, where he was willing to do that while also giving the war rig an opportunity to escape, what with the truck veering off into a bank and thusly crashing as a result. Not that we are meant to be entirely on Immortan Joe's side, but still.
However, despite her not looking harmed at all, she's in bad shape.
She did!
And Joey decides that she must have a C-section to save the baby. The baby doesn't make it though. Wait, how is this necessary to the plot again?
Jesus Christ, ER! It illustrates the primary modus operandi for Immortan Joe's breeder vault and why he's so doggedly persistent to get them back, for crying out loud. I mean, if you took this scene out, you'd complain that Immortan Joe has no reason to be chasing after these women, as he doesn't have anything to gain from it.
Skip ahead a bit, and Furiosa, the Spice Girls, reformed War Boy, and that other guy.
Skip ahead after also going backward in the stage of events. Clever, ER. Now everyone think the night sequence happened before the pregnant girl sequence.
Come across a naked lady in a tower, screaming for help. Other guys all...
It's a trap!
Then a gang of grannies come riding in. Yes, little old grannies were luring in passerby to thieve and murder them. Remember this too, kids. Your grandmother is capable of some sick, sick shit.
Is that the point where your expectations of realism were thrown out the window? What about all the other times something else ridiculous happened in the movie and you were all indifferent about it? Why is this the point where you put the brakes on what is deemed realistic? It's literally a post-apocalypse movie. It's not made to be real. This isn't even an argument whether this falls within conventions of its own rules. This is literally someone having incredulity to one part of a movie's gaudiness, but not any other.
Turns out that this is Furiosa's old gang, called the Volvolini. Get it? Volvolini? Vulvas? Women?
Yes, haha. That was very insightful, ER. Now I'll proceed to drill my head with a nail, as that joke was a bore.
Here's the best part. The green place was real, and supposedly every bit the fertile land it was reported to be. Some years back. Left in the hands of these women, however, now it's totally barren and lifeless. These old hags had some of the most scarce and valuable resources in this wasteland, and they squandered all of it. Yes, these people are the ones we're supposed to be rooting for. And I think it's solely because most of them have vaginas. Because, to be brutally honest, they really have nothing else going for them.
ER puts this great emphasis on how the green place becoming entirely fucked over on crops was entirely the Volvani's fault, when he literally doesn't have any evidence to prove that. Not once is it implied the Volvani purposefully or accidentally fucked things up. I mean, the rest of the world is a desert wasteland. Why wouldn't the green place eventually succumb to the same fate? Also, if ER is so enamored by the narration at the beginning of the movie, he would know that this diatribe of it being the Volvani's fault is total bullshit. The oil wars caused the whole world to fall into desolation, so it was inevitability that the green place would suffer as well. I mean, would ER blame a child for having herpes despite it being inherited by his parents? Is that the level ER would sink to come to that conclusion just so he can make the argument that we are merely rooting for this group, for them being women, and not they had something good taken from them with no control on their part to do anything about it? This is exactly what I mean when I say that ER is falling into the same pitfalls that third-wave feminists or regressive types are. Make an enemy, and then find anything else you can use to blame the enemy for doing so. Your hatred of said enemy is justified. Not that I'm saying third-wave feminists or regressive types don't have some disagreeable things you can lay the blame on them for, but for someone who is usually quite impartial about criticizing movies, he's clearly hell-bent on nailing this bias home.
You having a baby?
The baby. Warlord Jr. Gonna be so ugly.
It could be a girl.
What the fuck is this?
That is a pretty strange line, seeing as the pregnant girl was more or less talking about how the baby would be more disfigured rather than being male, but I'd rather chalk this up to the Volvani being just as insane in a different light to the War Boys, matriarchal by design even. Whether this matriarchy was meant to give people a rose-tinted perspective of feminism or just world building, I'd rather lean my intentions on the latter than the former, so I don't come off as someone wanting to blame every problem on someone else like a feminist would.
We leave the rig here and load the motorcycles up with as much as we can. We can maybe ride for 160 days.
Where on God's not-so-green earth are you that it would take 160 days to bike across anything?
Clearly ER knows that the setting for Mad Max has largely been in Australia. I'm more or less assuming that they're trying to cross through the dried up oceans. Max makes a note of how they'll just be driving on empty seabed to somewhere sustainable maybe. We as the audience are made to believe that this is a fruitless endeavor, which is primarily why Mad Max stops them from doing so. Unless if there was some kind of overwhelming confidence that they could find anything was portrayed in the film, I don't get how this is necessarily misleading the audience.
You know, hope is a mistake.
Yeah, I know, Max. I know. Well, Max convinces the whole gang to do a 180 to barrel through Joey's crew and back to the Citadel because guess what he realized?
They know it's undefended!
You mean the last hour of this movie was a total waste of time?
Again, he makes a good point that he would ever be a plot point for the movie to do so, and the fact that the plot of the movie is basically point A to point B to point A. The fact that Morin Joe just suddenly has that revelation is also ridiculous, as it just seems like he just saw the script and knew the intentions of the war rig going back. I honestly would have preferred it if he was just carelessly trying to apprehend the breeders in the war rig, since there would have been no way he would have known that that was the reason why they were driving back. More importantly, even if Joe is supposedly so doggedly determined to get the breeders back, what would he bring the breeders back to if he didn't have a fortress to keep them safe? Exactly why that being a conflict for Joe doesn't make a fucking lick of sense. He would have had something guarding the Citadel while he was out with the means to communicate between them if things get hairy. Anyway, this isn't a slight on ER, at least not this time.
Oh boy, gonna need a lot of plot armor to get through this minefield. But Max, and I truly do mean just Max, is the only one who effectively fights anybody off.
Kind of a strange criticism to throw if you are literally just going to contradict yourself a few seconds later, unless he means that there is a slight exception to the rule, maybe? I mean, weren't you complaining that Max wasn't fundamental to the story before? Why is it now an opportunity to complain that the Breeders and Furiosa do nothing? Are you just trying to find any reason to complain now?
What, did you think he was going to politely ask for your weapon?
Another weird nitpick, or that maybe Max could have said something to let her know, seeing that she was more upset that he took it while she was loading around.
Unlike the girls and grannies, Furiosa is not completely useless and even manages to catch Max when he has a little slip. Yeah, no.
Again, completely refuted your previous point about Max being the only one fighting off Immortan's henchmen effectively. I guess that's just 5 seconds I'm not getting back.
And then she tears off Joey's face super violently, because remember, she's a lady.
I don't really have any qualms with this bit. It's a satisfying vengeance, I guess, for Furiosa, seeing that she was taken away from her loved ones by Immortan's crew and having that payoff. Although seeing how injured Furiosa was, it seemed extremely ludicrous of her to be the one making the final blow just for the sake of her having previous beef with him. But sure, it's a feminist spin. Put your tinfoil hat on. They're invading your mind at every moment. They're turning the frickin' frogs gay.
This serves as nothing but lip service to the narrative, however, because it in no way halts the pursuit of this giant fleet of cars.
Why would it? Immortan's vehicle is in front of the war rig in front of anyone else. More importantly, they're reapproaching the same narrow chasm that only one specific type of vehicle could get into before. So it's not like the other vehicles could see that Immortan Joe was killed off from their perspective. As far as they're concerned, the fight is still on. As for the narrative, I'm not sure if he means narrative in regards to the story itself or just another extrapolation of the sort of feminist narrative he so desperately craves.
Luckily, Warboy is a jihadist.
As are all the other Warboys before it. Did you forget that Nox's tumors that would have killed him off before? Does the entire philosophy of the Warboys not strike you as consistent with Nox's tendency? I mean, that wasn't even necessarily why Nox even jihaded to begin with. He was approaching the little archway that the dirt bike bandits used as a trap to blockade Immortan's crew before. So logically, Nox could use her war rig to completely block out the rest of the crew from entering. Not to mention, Beefcake tore off the supercharger, so the war rig was bound to blow up anyway. So what exactly would you expect Nox to do? But hell, this might not even be a complaint in regards to the movie, just a nod at the correlation between warboys and extremist Muslims.
Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar!
I could go on about how this piddly wreck isn't going to stop this, when this didn't stop them before.
Jesus Christ, how dishonest of you. The blockade did stop the fleet the first time. That's why that Cadillac with monster truck wheels was the only one who could get over it, which is also why Immortan sent out volunteers to help him get the war rig, notably Nox because he was the closest to it. I mean, in the sense that it stopped the cars from going over indefinitely isn't true, but their detour from the main route cost them a lot of distance from the war rig, so reasonably, if they get blocked again, they would be stalled roughly the same amount of time. There you go, ER. That's how much time it took for me to prove that argument wrong.
But no plot. Now, is it just me, or is this ending thoroughly depressing? The Spice Girls return to the Citadel for some ill-advised reason, dump off the corpse of the leader for some incredibly ill-advised reason, and everybody up top just accepts it.
Well, foregoing the fact that Immortan sent every capable, able-bodied person who was an ally of his to get the war rig fall over your head, even if I do agree that it's a dumb plot device, or that dumping off Immortan Joe's corpse was a way to indicate the change of leadership, and that Max explained to the Spice Girls why it's tantamount to go to the Citadel rather than drive in endless dry seabeds, then yeah, I guess everything just happens spontaneously. Nothing ever gets explained like The Last Jedi, no?
Then the fat cow women decide to drain the aquifers and ostensibly leave the entire civilization to die of thirst. All the while, everybody celebrates their own imminent demise by animalistically ripping old Joey apart. Hooray for the good guys!
Again, we are left to wonder just exactly how much water is in those aquifers, and indeed could call to attention the moral grays of Joe's actions weighed against theirs. I already mentioned a better scene that would have taken the same amount of time as the one we got in the movie to illustrate Mordon as the bad guy undoubtedly, and Max and crew is undoubtedly good. All in all, yes, this scene reeks of citation needed in order to truly come to consensus as to whether or not what the Milk Girls are doing is right. But even so, inevitably that water would run out, no?
The guys up top even decide to let some of these lunatics ascend, because why not?
Clearly he's trying to make a comparison to the open borders policy of the EU laying in third world religious zealots to completely upend the values of the country they are immigrating, but a pretty weak analogy seen as to what purpose the peasants serve to Moron Joe is yet unclear.
As this is happening, Max fucks off without so much as a peck on the cheek, just the macho nod thing. Thanks for pulling all of our collective weight, bro. 'Twas all for nothing.
Again, you already defeated your previous stance of Max doing all the legwork, and more importantly, for someone who apparently knows so much about Mad Max, doesn't even understand that Mad Max all in all is a loner. He doesn't stick around for very long. He only stuck for so long with Furiosa out of necessity to survive. I mean, after they group up with the Volvani, Mad Max was given his own motorcycle to go where he wanted, and he was indeed intending to go to a route different from where Furiosa's gang was going. How is this out of character for Max to do?
The end. For everybody in the Citadel, because the famine grannies are gonna fuck everything up. I'm sorry, but there's just nothing to latch onto in this movie.
Again, that's fair, I guess, but it's not like I can really say, really? You didn't latch on to the high-octane action or the silly antics of our characters? Because that's just semantics. It's not like he's basing this off of objective value.
I mean, I can't really downplay the movie's incredible cinematography. Hell, I'll even grant that the editing is really fun and keeps things going at a good pace.
Well, there's a contention. He just said he couldn't latch on to anything, but points positives for its editing and cinematography, things he would notice and thereby latch on to.
The acting is also quite serviceable, though Tom Hardy couldn't really seem to decide on an accent.
Yep, no disagreement there. Tom Hardy is infamous for goofy-ass accents like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, which was the entire source of his meme-like nature. No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
But in the end, all for what?
Pretty semantical faux pas, because you could put that phrase ad nauseum at any movie you didn't like. Lord of the Rings had great set pieces and brilliant acting, but in the end, all for what? See what I mean?
The action's great, more practical effects and all that, but that's it.
I guess here goes another tally for the refuted by Mad Max 1, 2, or 3, seeing as Road Warrior seemed inept on a point behind our motivation for Mad Max to get gas or get his car back, but that just seems like a really unfair way to paint a movie as bad because it doesn't seem to have a point but to merely entertain. I mean, isn't that what a movie is designed for? Don't get me wrong. I can see where a movie having good morals or strike up real-world conversations are key, like the ones I'm having now, but inherently those thoughts come from a movie piquing your interest, and that I would consider to be the sole intent behind a movie.
And that's not enough. We, or at least I, need characters to care about anything that they're put through.
Nox, Furiosa, and Mad Max himself even, the breeders, maybe the Volvani in a given light, the plight of the peasants. Whether you consider them characters or not is a point of contention you haven't struck up because you've been too busy with making nicknames for them rather than discussing whether their character has anything foundational as a whole.
Warboy is maybe the only character with an arc in the whole film, when he switches to Furiosa's side because interchangeable model actress 43 batted her baby blues at him.
Other than Redhead being a bit sympathetic for him and Nox's entire plight of proving himself to Moron Joe completely wasted while incapable of dying for said plight, but yeah, it's because of the power of boners, as CinemaSins would put it, that led him to change his mind on things. Also, Max arguably has some kind of character arc as well to help people, even if, again, the stupid visions giving him some moral code don't make sense given his already established moral code, and Furiosa's arc to not believe in basically fairy tales and get real, so to speak.
He's not a terribly complex character or even memorable, but he's likable enough. Extra sympathy points for naming his tumors. I suppose it was better that he die in a blaze of glory, leaving his erstwhile companions, who brought him up and gave meaning to his life, to die in the wastelands.
Weren't they just about to dump his ass off on the Citadel to die from his own illnesses, though? He only managed to get a hitch off of a pal just by overpowering him. Didn't seem like they were there to bring him up, only to string him up like he's already dead.
Waifus. Not even once. At least tell me this, Feels Road lovers. Why Mad Max? I mean, other than the blatant attempt to scam people into the theaters under the guise that they were going to a Mad Max film.
Weird. I didn't get scammed off my showing of Mad Max. Maybe you shouldn't watch those Chinese knockoff films that you torrented off Pirate Bay or something. That might help. Oh, wait. You meant that Max was notably absent in the film. Oh, yeah. Just let me go back to the refuted in Mad Max 1, 2, or 3 list again. Ding, ding, ding.
I hate to admit it, but those first few minutes of this film really ruined it for me. It genuinely got me invested in Max, in his character, and in his plight. But then bam! He was relegated to the supporting cast with the only story to replace him being some nonsensical plot about a bunch of independent little fishies who don't need no bicycle.
I feel like I'm fucking repeating myself. I was genuinely invested in Max's plight for gasoline of all things in roadwear, but then, bam, he was relegated to a fetch quest busybody with the only story to replace him being a ragtag bunch of white-clothed football gear thieving purists trying aimlessly to defend an oil depot by a relentless bandit mob. I was genuinely interested in Max's plight for his own dilapidated car and Beyond Thunderdome, but then bam, he was relegated to a pawn in someone else's game for political power in an offshoot bandit town with the only story to replace him with being a silly gladiatorial match between him and a literal retard where Max gets exiled to a bunch of teenagers.
Only throughout the movie, it's shoved down our throats over and over again that the fishies do need the bicycle, and are almost utterly useless without it.
I mean, they have been relegated in a vault for what I presume has been their entire lives. Like, do you expect them to be useful in a setting of which they've never confronted with? And wasn't like the breeders were against the idea of getting help. I mean, what is Furiosa there for but to help them? How do you conflate them wanting to be free with them being independent from all manner of assistance?
But it hurts the bicycle to have to deal with these fishies at all.
Well, hey, if that's the point where you up and quit, I guess Max should have just said fuck it and not dealt with the gas depot in Mad Max 2, or get his car back in Mad Max 3 because he might get hurt. In the fucking apocalypse, no less? Something you should expect to happen in any normal situation? Christ me, I'm having an aneurysm at this utter incapability to understand world building.
So why doesn't he pedal away and leave the fishies high and dry?
Again, he did try, but of course the truck didn't work because of some arbitrary failsafe. So this is an example where you can just think he's just respecting woman too much. I mean, this is exactly the kind of infantile reasoning that a feminist would come to seeing every movie as instinctually misogynistic, is it not? But I guess we eat it up because they're so insufferable while not even realizing that we are no different than them.
You know what? Maybe this movie is smarter than I've been giving it credit for. Maybe it knows exactly what it's doing, and is actually a clever bit of social commentary disguised as a brainless action movie. So, moral of Furiosa and Mad Maxine Feels Road. Never let women be in charge.
I'm not sure if I should be laughing with him or at him for this. Hey, I guess maybe he is an advocate for sex slavery, seeing as everyone rebutted in the comments from those who thought he originally was, seeing as he's twisting the moral of the movie to fit his own biases?
They steal your shit and then throw it all away for feels. George Miller confirmed for Shitlord. Good night, everybody.
Well, I guess that's it. And boy, was it worse than I last remember it. Maybe it was just because it was one of his early reviews. Or maybe he was so quick to jump on the same tug of war that the MRAs and feminists got on with this movie. I'm not sure, but throughout this entire movie, I kept internally screaming in my mind, not exclusive to Fury Road for being at fault, therefore not solely its fault. Because I honestly think that if ER had watched the previous Mad Max movies, that he'd have a better understanding of what was going on here, and not think much of it. Even Razor Fist, what with his own review of the movie being a bit turgid on parts, at least made the effort to watch the previous movies and to tell why, in his mind, they are superior to it with more poignant compare and contrasts. ER's entire review of this movie seems lazy, specifically blind to key parts, and riddled with a lot of the fallacies and complaining about the film's consistency to reality rather than its own internal consistency, where he doesn't in any of his other reviews. As for one more offhand issue, ER also sort of weighs away his definition of the term Mary Sue in order to obfuscate the fact that Han Solo and Solo, a Star Wars story, is a Mary Sue, where it used to be clear and concise in meaning. He uses a lot of unusually flowery and vague words and meanings to explain how this interpretation of Han Solo isn't one whereas Rey from the Star Wars sequels is. But other than that, ER is consistently pretty spot on in his critiques. Even in his Fury Road critique, he does nail some issues with the movie that I can't just ignore because I like the movie a lot. I know it may sound like that I hate him because of how passionate I can get with my responses in regards to what he's saying, but I'm passionate about movie critique and movies in general. It's something I do a lot of back and forth with my best friend at times when neither of us can agree on a key detail. In fact, it was our disagreement with elements of Fury Road itself that led me to sort of rewind back to critiques of it like his and Razor Fist's, where I initially thought nothing of it previously. To iterate, I don't think ER is a Nazi, a white supremacist, whatever buzzword character assassination is popular now to use against someone. I don't hate the guy, I like his work. So before you dislike this video and leave a comment saying that I'm some kind of alt-left beta-cook male who can't take a joke, well, you've made it this far, haven't you?